The South African government has vowed that the 14 SANDF members who died in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo will be given a decent send-off. The handing over of mortal remains will be held at the Air Force Base Swartkorp in Centurion on Thursday. There will also be a memorial service to pay homage to the departed troops. President Cyril Ramaphosa declared 7 days of mourning and the national flag flown at half-mast to honor the fallen heroes. South African authorities worked with the United Nations to facilitate the movement of mortal remains. Bereaved families seek closure and hope their loved ones will also rest in eternal peace. South Africa is part of the SADC mission, SAMI DRC, and UN mission MONUSCO to restore stability in the mineral-rich parts of Congo that is facing instability. A historic joint summit by SADC East African community leaders called for a ceasefire in the Eastern DRC and for the states and non-state actors to get on the negotiating table.
Action is now. The lives of millions depends on our ability to navigate this complex and challenging situation with wisdom, clarity of mind, empathy for the millions whose lives and livelihoods have been plunged into uncertainty.
Regrettably, on Monday, the 27th January 2025, several long-range mortar bombs were launched towards Goma Airport, with some landing in the South African National Defence Force base, leading to the loss of 3 additional South African National Defence Force soldiers. The families of the fallen heroes are notified, and plans are underway to repatriate the remains of our gallant soldiers back home to South Africa.
To bring you some insight, we speak to SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, who joins us to discuss this. A very good evening to you, Ms. Sophie. Thank you for your time. I mean, after delays, it will be an emotionally charged occasion when the handing over of SANDF soldiers' remains happens tomorrow. What's to be expected of such a process on the back of learning of the killings that continue to happen in Goma?
Well, we expect that the remains will arrive in the country almost late today or early hours of the morning. We know that it has been a long journey for this to happen, starting with the remains leaving Goma via Rwanda and then Uganda, with all those processes that were conducted by the United Nations and the relevant authorities in Uganda. And this morning at 8:30 South African time, it was 9:30 local time, the remains were flown out of Uganda to Tanzania, where they are going to drop the 2 soldiers from Tanzania who also died during that conflict in the DRC. From there, they have to go to Malawi, other 2 soldiers, and then to South Africa. And therefore, it is a very, very long journey. It is very difficult to get a sense where they are at this moment, because the communication hasn't been that clear. I mean, we were told that the remains will be handed over or the memorial service will start at 1 tomorrow. There was a change of plan. We were told it's 9 o'clock in the morning. We've just received the message that now it's not 9 in the morning. It's likely going to be late in the afternoon. So the communication hasn't been that good in terms of engaging media so that we are really able to communicate the real facts and authentic information. Fortunately, with Uganda, our colleague in Uganda was able to speak to the Ugandans that side. That's why we were able to have information that the remains will be repatriated to South Africa earlier today. It's very difficult, and fortunately, the United Nations, because some of them were under MONUSCO, MONUSCO is also able to communicate. But even MONUSCO yesterday evening said no, the remains will only be repatriated on Thursday. So it's very difficult. We are trying to do the story, so we'll see what's going to happen. And finally, when will the Defense Force issue a statement again that really confirms what is the latest in relation to the repatriation and in relation to the memorial or the handing over of the remains to the families.
With all the communication and planning difficulties that you speak of, one cannot begin to imagine what the families of those who lost loved ones are going through, with really not knowing when their loved ones will arrive, where they are. And of course, SABC News has touched on several and interacted with several of these family members who have spoken about their inability to mourn because they await their loved ones.
I think they do get information because I think it will be wrong not to inform families constantly in terms of where this process is. I think they do get information. Unfortunately, it's very difficult now to access them because maybe the instruction was given that they shouldn't speak to the media. So it's a very difficult story to handle, I must say.
And we know that it's a story that has continued to develop in many ways. I mean, the South African government has resisted calls from other political parties in parliament for the immediate withdrawal of the country's trapped forces in the DRC. As we've watched those conversations and debates, what considerations would have to be made before such a decision or step is taken?
It is a very difficult decision to make. One, this is a sensitive matter because it is about a conflict. And those soldiers are in a territory that is now under the M23 rebels. So there's a lot that you have to negotiate. And you can't just say, we will pull out tomorrow. A lot has to happen behind the scenes, because remember, when you deploy your troops with the military way or the weapons. You have to discuss how are you going to handle this movement of these weapons, and which transport are you going to use? Because we know that the airport in Goma is not in a good state in terms of planes to land, and therefore which route are you going to take? You know that it was a problem to repatriate the bodies because they had to use the road via Rwanda, and then 10 hours drive from the Rwandan border to Uganda. So it is a very difficult operation because it involves people who are in a conflict zone. It's not like airlifting people where there was an accident. It's a complete difficult mission, and many stakeholders that are involved that you have to speak to, but also you living quickly. You don't want a vacuum where things get worse. Therefore, it is a difficult process. We know that ministers of defense and the generals, both EAC and SADC, are still engaged in talks in terms of how do you agree on a ceasefire, and all sides agree on a ceasefire, and the ceasefire does hold. So it is still a very complex matter to navigate, and therefore it's not going to be easy for the Department of International Relations or Defense to say, yes, we are pulling out of the DRC. It's not as easy as all that, because these are the issues that you have to consider. before you can make such an announcement. But we know that the EAC and SADC ministers of defense and the generals are talking to all stakeholders, because what is critical is to be able to achieve that ceasefire, and therefore even movement of goods and services and people will be much easier.
Very well. Thank you so much for that update. SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena.